So I think, Matt, from what I can see from the Zoom screen, we are now live streaming on YouTube. So welcome to the world of people interested in bugs and invertebrates. And just to bring everybody into the picture, we have today been having our quarterly Buglife board meeting. Buglife, as the European invertebrate charity, Europe's only invertebrate charity. We are extremely interested in invertebrates, keeping them safe, making space for them, developing a peaceful coexistence with invertebrates. And that's the theme of this afternoon's series of presentations following on from our AGM earlier on in the day. We're talking about living with bugs. And people will clearly have seen from the media and elsewhere that there is very substantial concern around the world, including the United Kingdom, including the 4 countries of the United Kingdom, around the trajectory of invertebrates, insects in water, in terrestrial environments, and indeed where invertebrates occur in marine environments, there also. And Buglife has its major mission to develop friendlier relationships with invertebrates, to make space for them and ensure that fewer invertebrates go extinct. We're desperately keen for people to help out with the mission. So if you are interested in the environment, you are interested in invertebrates, please do join or support Buglife in any way that you can. We have 3 different presentations for you this afternoon. One from Wales, one talking about bugs and pollution, and then a third giving us a smart guide to what insects do and why. We've got 3 excellent speakers, Clare Dinham, David Smith, Ross Piper, all of whom you will probably know and recognise the names of. Our first presentation is coming from Wales. I'm speaking to you from Cardiff, and we're going to hear from Clare Dinham, who's been with Buglife since 2010, initially as a brownfield stepping stone officer. But since then, Din came back to Wales and is now essentially Director Wales of Buglife Cymru. And it's Clare who will be talking about putting bugs on the map in Wales, plans and prospects. So what we're expecting is that each of the talks will be 20 to 25 minutes long. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. And if you could type those, if you're on YouTube, into chat. If you're here on Zoom, also type those questions into chat, and we'll gather them up and ask each of the speakers at the end of their presentation. So Din, we are with you for this first chat. So whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Great, thanks, Steve. Apologies, the dog has just started barking as this is due to start. Bear with me just 1 second. Okay. So thanks for the introduction, Steve. As Steve mentioned, my name is Clare Dinham and I'm the Wales manager for Buglife Cymru. And today I'll be telling you about putting bugs on the map in Wales. So what plans do we have for the future as Buglife Cymru, and how we're going to help to conserve and raise awareness of invertebrates. So today it gives me great pleasure to announce that just over a week ago, Buglife and a group of partners was awarded funding by the Natural Lottery Heritage Fund for a species conservation project called Natur am Byth. So I'll just give you a little bit of background as to how that's come about. So over the past 3 years or so, Buglife and several species NGOs have been discussing and developing ideas for a Wales-wide species project in a similar vein to Back from the Brink in England. Around about 18 months or so ago, Natural Resources Wales came on board as a partner, as did 2 other NGOs outside of the Rethink Nature Partnership, and those were Marine Conservation Society and the Vincent Wildlife Trust. And the project idea of Natur am Byth was born. The direct translation is nature forever, but hopefully most of you agree said in Welsh gives it much more gusto, so Natur am Byth. So a development phase application was submitted to the lottery in February of this year. And we found out last week that it was successful, which was amazing. So it's very much hot off the press. This brilliant news for species conservation in Wales, gives us a great way to move forward, to raise awareness and conserve some species which really are on the brink of existence and survival in Wales. And we'll be starting to work on this project come this September for the 18-month development phase. So this image here just shows you some examples of some of the target species we'll be working on, and also some of the project areas. So down in the south there, in the purple, we've got Swansea Bay, and then we've got the Marches in the middle there, and we've got the Llŷn Peninsula and Anglesey and Snowdonia as well. And then we've got 6 single species projects on top of that. So the project, the broader areas like Swansea Bay, that's cross taxa projects. And then we've got 6 single species projects, and these are scarce yellow Sally, shrill cardaby, the high brown fritillary, lesser horseshoe bat, the adder, and the barbastelle bat. So the vision for Natur am Byth is a project that will lead the way to nature recovery by showing how all the people of Wales and our most endangered wildlife can flourish together. So Natur am Byth is the 3rd instalment in the trilogy of species conservation projects, following on from Back from the Brink in England, Species on the Edge in Scotland, which is now in its development phase. So work on our development phase will start this September and last for 18 months. And if successful, the delivery phase of the project will begin in September 23 and will be delivered over a 4-year period. So we got, pretty much 5.5 years to work on species conservation projects across Wales, which is huge. So overall, including the non-cash contributions, the cost of the project comes in at around 8 million, just a huge project. We've secured just under £5 million from the lottery, Heritage Lottery, and we've had significant contribution from Natural Resources Wales as well of 1.7 million, and there's been other contributions as well. So this is our project partnership. It consists of the Rethink Nature NGOs, and in addition to that, then, as I mentioned earlier, we've got Marine Conservation Society, Vincent Wildlife Trust, and Natural Resources Wales, who are sort of leading the partnership. We also have many delivery partners on board, as you can see that long list on the right-hand side of the screen there. So these are organisations that are already signed up and very keen to be involved in the project. And as the development phase continues, we plan to bring on more partners on board. I should say it's taken a huge amount of work to get to a stage where we now are, from all of the partners across the partnership, but also within Buglife as well. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Matt for his role on the Natur am Byth board and support from a wide range of colleagues internally at Buglife. So it really has been a team effort. So well done to everyone involved, and thanks very much for your help. So Buglife is leading on 2 elements of Natur am Byth. We're leading on the Swansea Bay project in partnership with Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust, and we're also leading on 1 single species project as well. So I'll just tell you a little bit about both of those projects. So as I mentioned, we'll be leading Swansea Bay with Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust. This project area covers Swansea and the Gower and extends to Merthyr Mawr in the west and into Carmarthen Bay in the east. We'll be recruiting a development officer during the development phase for the Swansea Bay project, and a project manager and a conservation officer for the delivery phase of the project. So we'll be getting some additional staff on board and expanding the team in Wales. So here are our target species. So the overall title of the project is Swansea Bay Coast, Commons and Communities. So the coast and the commons bring out the main habitats we'll be working on, and communities, which is an important element of the project, which I'll touch upon later on. So in terms of coastal dune and strandline species, we will be working on sand lizard, fen orchid, the strandline beetle and narrowmouth whorl snail. And then in terms of the coastal grassland, cliffs and arable habitats, we'll be focusing on the silky wave moth, burnt tip orchid, Goldilocks aster and broad fruited corn salad. On the commons, we've got a different mix of species here. So we've got southern damselfly, six-spotted cranefly, three-lobed water crowfoot, and the lichen Cladonia pezziformis. And there's an extra little C that we've snuck in there, which is canals, because there was another key species within this project area that we couldn't ignore, and that was the fen raff spider. So we will be working on this amazing species as well, which is found within sort of pretty much on the border of Neath Talbot and Swansea. And communities. So Swansea Bay project takes in the urban areas of Swansea and Neath Talbot, and out of all of the project areas across Natur and Byth has the largest amount of people in them, and therefore the biggest potential to engage with a wide range of audiences and communities, and hopefully audiences maybe that wouldn't necessarily have engaged with nature as well. So we're really keen to be looking at different groups of people and trying to think of new and innovative ways to engage them and activities to get involved with. So that's a really important part of the project that we'll be developing to a very detailed level during this forthcoming development phase. So I'll just talk a little bit now about our single species project, about the scarce yellow sally or Isogenus nubecula. So this stonefly is critically endangered, and it's probably the most at risk of extinction out of all of the target species across NAB. And you can only find it along a 20-kilometre stretch of the River Dee near the Wrexham area. It was believed to be extinct in the UK until about 30 or so years ago, until it was sort of accidentally found during part of Environment Agency regular river monitoring. And then following on from the significant find, Natural Resources Wales commissioned further surveys led by John Davy Bowker and others. And there's now several locations, 5 or 6 locations along that stretch of the Dee where this stonefly can be found. So as part of the project, we want to find out more about the ecology and habitat requirements of the species. We'll be carrying out or working with our entomological experts to carry out a range of sampling techniques. So the more traditional kick sampling, also looking at eDNA techniques, which will be sort of less invasive. And the use of eDNA will also allow us to do some samples of some other rivers elsewhere in Wales, which are near some historic records of scarce yellow sally just over the border in England. So whereas we wouldn't use our resources to do kick sampling surveys, to do eDNA is very quick and very efficient. So it could bring up the fact that we do have Isogenus in some of our other Welsh rivers. So that'll be very exciting to keep an eye on. We'll also be continuing ongoing studies looking at captive rearing and exploring the option of translocation of the stonefly to other areas within its former range as well. So that may or may not become feasible during the length of the project, because the project is around 5.5 years, but at the very least, we'll be able to look into that and study more about the habitat and ecology of the species. And again, as with all of the Natur and Byth project, will be building in communication and engagement with local communities and other NGOs and those involved in the project. So that's a little roundup of Natur and Byth. You know, it's a hugely significant project for Buglife and the partnership. And I think it'll really serve us well in terms of putting Buglife on the map elsewhere in Wales. So we're a team of 3, all based in South Wales, and to a certain extent that sort of limits our reach, and having members of staff in other areas of Wales will be really beneficial. So for this Isogenus project, we will have a member of staff based up in North Wales. So I'm really looking forward to having a member of staff on the ground there. So I'll move on to tell you about another project that we've gotten some funding for. So this is the Green Recovery Capacity Building Scheme. So this is money given by the Welsh Government that's come through the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And it's essentially revenue funding in order to support organisations as a result of the impacts of COVID. So we were fortunate enough to secure funding in Wales for a 5-month chunk of funding. And this has allowed us to look at some key areas of our work in Wales and and sort of develop our skills and knowledge. So one of the largest parts of this funding is to develop our important invertebrate areas work in Wales. I'm sure you're all familiar with important invertebrate areas. So it's a Buglife initiative to identify the best and most important areas for our most at-risk species across the UK. So in Wales, we've carried out fine-scale mapping of 8 of our 16 important invertebrate areas, but we still have 8 left. So initially, the mapping is done at a broad-scale level, and then what we aim to do then across all of our broad-scale areas is to map it in finer detail, working with partners who know the local area and filtering in many thousands of invertebrate records as well. So this funding has been brilliant in allowing us to complete the final 8 fine-scale mapping important invertebrate areas in Wales. So we've actually now carried out all of the workshops for those remaining 8. And the funding has provided time for other colleagues, our projects manager and our GIS officer, to work on this specifically. And they are now finalising the fine-scale maps, working with our project partners. So by the end of the summer, we'll have mapped at a fine-scale level all of our important invertebrate areas across Wales, which will be brilliant. And sitting alongside that, then we'll have profiles to go with them. We've had interest from the record centres all across Wales who want to include these fine-scale maps within data searches. So whenever consultants or others request data searches, this will be in the supplementary information so they can see where these key areas are and what the key species are and the issues and threats for those relevant areas. We've had support allowing our fundraising officer to spend some time focusing specifically on Wales. Some of her main tasks are to produce a 5-year fundraising plan. So we'll be looking at, the usual suspects around fundraising grants, trusts, the lottery, the landfill, etc. But we also want to sort of broaden our horizons and look at other opportunities for funding to make our growth in Wales sustainable. So she's producing that plan. She's also supporting myself and my colleague Liam in terms of project delivery. So we both have time in order to develop projects and also fundraise for them. So this stage within the project, we've produced a short list of different projects and areas of work that we'd like to develop in line with the Buglife strategy and business plan. So we're working on developing a rare bees project. So that's the small scabious bee you can see on site there that Liam and I are working on with Holly's support. And we've got quite a wide range of other projects that we're bringing to a level where it's almost like off the shelf then. So as and when future funding arises in the coming years, we can say, oh, great, well, we've already developed X, Y, and Z project. That seems to fit, and we can take it from there. So we're not starting from scratch. We're starting from a place of, where we've already built up some information and built up some partnerships. So again, this revenue funding to allow staff time for members of my team and others within Buglife really helps stand us in good stead for the future. And that's really what this funding is about. Another strain or strand of the project funding is staff training and mentoring. So, for example, I'll be doing some mental health first aid training, so I'm able to support the team better in Wales from that point of view. Something that's very important. We're also engaging in training provided by Wales Environment Link, who have also received this type of funding. And the main emphasis of their project is to provide training to their NGO members, of which we are one. So it's my time to enable us to go on to training around that. And a lot of that is focused on diversity, inclusion, and equality. And we're also working with a consultancy called Heritage Insider, who are providing specific project development mentoring. So I've asked them to provide us specific support around monitoring and evaluation of projects, legacy planning, and also how to engage with a wider and more diverse range of partners and also groups as well. So I feel like that's something that we can maybe improve upon in our project delivery. So it's great to have that specific mentoring on board that's really tailored to our needs within our project development in Wales. And I think there'll be lots of outcomes from that training that'll hopefully be of interest to colleagues within Buglife as well. And I've sort of offered to share those learnings when we come to the end of our funding period at the end of July. So I'd just like to briefly introduce you to our team. There's only 3 of us, so it won't take too long. Aside from myself, there's my colleague Liam in the picture on the left there, and Emily on the right. So Emily delivers our Neath Talbot Beelines project. So that's a 3-year Heritage Lottery funded project delivering beelines specifically within Neath Talbot. Through this, we aim to deliver 40 hectares of restored grassland and other species-rich habitats, and help our partners to deliver more favourable habitats for pollinators. We're doing a wide range of engagement, working with schools. We've got art projects, we've got mental health well-being projects, bringing in external consultants with that type of expertise. So we're sort of ensuring that we've got the important nature conservation being delivered on the ground, but we're also taking in wider aspects of project delivery, which are all really important as well, particularly when it comes to involving people with nature and getting them out there and enthused about invertebrates and the positive impacts that can have on their well-being as well. So Liam, our other colleague, he's our Buglife Cymru star entomologist. The photograph on the right there is Liam with a presenter from Countryfile. He was on the Countryfile episode about pollinators and meadows a couple of weeks ago. He gets involved in a wide range of projects, or as I mentioned, he's part of the Green Recovery Project. He also delivers a project in Gwent on cold spoil invertebrates, which is one of his sort of areas of expertise. And he gets involved with a wide range of other projects. So he's supported Buglife staff based in England on the Back and the Brink project, working on some of their projects, as well as other delivering workshops, doing surveys. So this year is a really busy time for him, but you know, a great member of the team in terms of his entomological expertise, and that allows us to get involved in a wide range of projects. So I think it's fair to say with Natur and Byth and with the Green Recovery funding, you know, the next sort of few years are looking really positive for Buglife in Wales, and will be a great time for us to grow the organisation and our awareness, and you know, get more people knowing about Buglife and knowing about insects and other invertebrates and why it's so important to conserve them. So I believe that's my presentation over with. I'll just stop sharing my screen now. So hopefully I'm back with everybody else.
Thank you, Din, for that. And can I just check that people can hear me? Yep, good. Okay, I've been having technical difficulties here. As your dog was barking, I was having all kinds of problems, Din.
So sorry about that.
No, it's fine. It's not the dog, it's at my end. My dog has just gone out, but I mean, what I think you've demonstrated is just how incredibly all-embracing the role of people in senior management positions in NGOs like Buglife is, with this incredibly wide range of things you've got to juggle with. And it's just tremendous to hear that, and tremendous to hear just how much is happening in Wales. I look out of my window onto some of the places you've been talking about, and it's just tremendous to hear about it. Can I ask whether there are any questions or comments on Din's presentation?
We've got a couple of questions, Steve. So we've got one question. Can you tell us about that bee on that scabious flower?
Yeah, sure. So that's a small scabious bee. So back in, well, it was last year now, we worked on a small postcode lottery funded project which focused on the small scabious bee and the large scabious bee. We only had about 5 months really to deliver it, but it was really, really successful. And we did lots of plug planting with local groups and communities, and worked with the local authorities in only a small sort of area in South Wales. And that was almost like worked like a pilot project. So we're using the small scabious bee as one of our flagship bee species for our Wales Rare Bee project, which is also going to be looking at that species and others, potentially the brown banded carder bee, maybe the shrill, and various other solitary bees in South Wales as well. So it's a species that's flagged up in our Wales Bee report as one of our rarer species in Wales. So we're really keen to work with local groups and other NGOs to help conserve that bee, and also importantly, find out where its distribution is at the minute, confirm that, and also scope out some new sites, because it must be on other sites locally in across South Wales. So we want to identify some new sites for the small scabious bee as well. Thank
you. We've got a question from Eugenie Reagan. Says, I'd love to hear more about the EDNA work. Sounds really innovative.
Well, I'll be honest, I can't really tell you about the technicalities of EDNA, because that's beyond me, to be honest. So we're working with an ecologist who's been, an entomologist, freshwater entomologist, who's been involved with the scarce yellow Sally for some years now, working with Natural Resources Wales. And they've been trialling these techniques. So from what, Matt, I'm sure you could give a much better description of EDNA than I can, but it's taking samples from the water and analysing very small fragments of DNA to help you identify species. And it can be a really sort of less invasive way of surveying. It can be a way to save time as well. So I mentioned when I was talking about the scarce yellow Sally that we'll be looking at some rivers in the east of Wales, which, there aren't records of it previously, but there are some records from rivers in England, just the other side of the border. So I know Craig McAdam, our conservation director, who's our freshwater expert, he's really keen for us to use that eDNA technique to quickly just take some samples, get them tested, just to see on the off chance that there may be some record there of isogenous. But Matt, please do feel free to add to the eDNA description.
Well, we did a bit of work last year with Natural England on a thing called the Barcode of Life database, or the BOLD database, where we identified, what sort of DNA information there is available for British invertebrates and sort of where the big gaps are. So there's definitely a huge potential for eDNA in the future to sort of help us to monitor and understand the distribution of invertebrates, I think. We've got another question for you, Din. They say, what's that no insectinction thing behind you?
Well, no insectinction is Buglife's campaign to raise awareness of invertebrates and how we can protect and conserve them, really. So that's our sort of banner at the moment, and we really want to encourage safe spaces for invertebrates. So things like beelines, providing connected habitats, that's a great way. Raising awareness around sources of pollution, which David is going to talk about more. So that could be light, that could be pollution to our freshwater ecosystems, and also on land as well. And getting people to love invertebrates, or at the very least to like them and respect them. I think they do so much for us. They help clean our air, our waters, they make our soils efficient, pollinators, it's the food we eat. So even if people don't like bugs, that's fine, but just respect them. That's what I say anyway. That's what I try and get across to people. And, where there's opportunities to enthuse and get that greater involvement, then we capitalize on those and make the most of it.
Brilliant, Din. That's all the questions I've got in the chats. I don't know if anyone else has any questions they want to ask Din.
Okay, thank you, Matt, for that. The eDNA thing, I think, is a really interesting one, because with rivers, one of the key questions is how far downstream eDNA does before it degrades, which on the one hand can be really positive. So if you're sampling in headwaters, you know exactly where the material has come from. If, however, you're about 10 kilometers downstream, you can still detect some of the material that might have been generated in a very different place within the river network. And I think that's one of the things we've got to nail down far better. The other dimension is that I think we need people still to go out and look on the ground and see real insects and invertebrates, because that's part of the delight of being involved with invertebrates and seeing the intricacies of their structure and maintaining natural history connections with them. So on the one hand, eDNA is potentially an absolutely wonderful tool. It doesn't solve all of our problems around insect conservation, but tremendously valuable to see it being used. Are you using it, Din? There are other quite interesting invertebrates in the river network in Wales, such as Ceratella notata. Are we just screening for isogenous, or are we looking for other things as well?
At the minute for this project, it's just isogenous. I think there may be scope to do some work on Potamanthus luteus as well, because that's only fairly recently been recorded on the D. It wasn't known from that area, so so those would be the focus, but more so isogenous navecula for that particular project. But I'm sure other opportunities will arise in the future. And a couple of years back, we did a blue ground beetle project in Neath Port Talbot, and did a lot of survey work on the ground for that species. And we're working with Exeter University and Natural Resources Wales. The uni has got a PhD student down there who's looking at all aspects of blue ground beetle, and one element of that is looking at the EDNA. So we're trying to work with them to help them develop that as well, because it's quite a tricky species to find, being active only at night.
So, and the potential in soil actually could be far more tractable, because the signal is then far more local to the place where
that's right,
we pick things up. So
yeah.
Eugenie wants to know, what's your favourite Welsh invertebrate, Din?
Oh, it's tough. I would probably say an oil beetle, say violet oil beetle. That and blue ground beetle, there's a bit of a tussle there, but I absolutely love oil beetles. It's one of my favorite things to do in spring, go to some known sites and go looking for them. I like their life history, how they're associated with solitary bees, parasitizing the nest there. If the larvae, the triungulates, actually make their way to it, the chances of which are extremely low. So whenever I see an adult, I always think, wow, you're the lucky one, you've hit the lottery. And they're so charismatic, and yeah, so I would say oil beetles for sure. I'm
very disappointed you didn't choose a freshwater invertebrate, Din, but I
won't. My bad, Steve, next time.
Any other questions or comments about Din's presentation on this wonderful world in Wales we have?
So it sounds like really exciting work, Din. It's really brilliant to see what you're doing in Wales.
Oh, thanks very much. Yeah, it's an exciting time now with Natur Ambith kicking off as well. So yeah, really excited.
Yeah. Okay, no others. Yeah, you must keep me informed, Din, about how well you feel the statutory sector does around invertebrate conservation. I know NRW have been very closely involved in Natur Ambith, but in fact, I'll come and poke my head through your window from time to time at Forest Farm as well, when I can.
Yeah, please do, Steve.
Discussion about that location. So
nice one. Thanks very much.
Great stuff. All right, thank you, Din, for that. So I'm going to move us on in the agenda to our next presenter, and that is David Smith. So David is quite a recent recruit to Buglife, joined us in December 2020, previously in the National Trust around external affairs matters, and also has various kind of subversive activities in his history around things like Surfers Against Sewage, work on plastic-free contamination and very things. So David, you are, with a background like that, very welcome into Buglife. And we're ready to hear what you have to tell us, in particular about safety first, protecting bugs from pollution.
Thanks so much, Steve. Let me just get my screen up ready for share. Start the beginning. There we are. Yeah, so yeah, thank you, Steve. Hi to everyone else, and thank you for staying in to listen to us speak today. As you said, my name's David. I am the Social Change and Advocacy Officer here at Buglife. I think I've got a great job, a really fun job of helping us to create change and facilitate change in the public and with policymakers across a whole range of things. And today, particularly talking about kind of a sort of, I suppose, my main focus of work, which revolves around pollution and a few different forms of pollution that are particularly threatening to invertebrates. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what we're doing here at Buglife, what we want to see from policy and how legislation can help us achieve those kind of things, and also a few things that we can do, we can all do as individuals to help us with our cause. So thankfully, Din has nicely introduced known extinction, so I don't really need to go into that. But now you're all familiar with it. One of the parts that my area of work really comes into is creating safe spaces for insects. Of what Din was talking about really was creating that room for insects to thrive and to to kind of bounce back. But space isn't enough if those spaces are going to be polluted, and things can't survive and thrive there. So as part of our No Insect Extinction campaign, we are really trying to make sure that our land, our air, our fresh waters are free from pollutants, and in that I'll include invasive species, if you consider an invasive species a pollutant for the purpose of this presentation. That'll be great. So I'll start off really talking about invasive species and creating safe spaces for invasive species. For those of you who don't know, invasive non-native species are one of the biggest threats to biodiversity across the planet. It's right up there with habitat loss. And it's really about non-native species making their way into these areas and really diminishing what should be there in the first place. This is compounded at the moment by issues such as climate change that are helping to create habitats for species to thrive in locations where they wouldn't once have done so beforehand. Particular worry and concern to us at Buglife is terrestrial invertebrates, which are arriving here in the UK in particular faster than other groupings. For a number of reasons, not just down to climate change, but through the way that we actually move stuff into the country and how we move things around within the country, and just simply how these species can spread and change where they are pretty rapidly. And again, new kind of sort of pressing threats at the moment are surrounded by things with new trade deals, for example, the issues that new ideas such as free ports might pose, but also the increase in things like online trade, the ability to purchase things online and get it shipped around the world fairly quickly to your front door. So there are a number of reasons why these species are getting here quickly. Invasive non-native species aren't just a small kind of inconsequential thing. Whilst there are thousands of new species arriving all the time, only a small percentage actually become what's considered invasive, in that they're actually starting to cause harm and damage the natural ecosystem. And in the UK, this costs roughly £2 billion. So this isn't just a small thing that's inconsequential. It has a factor on not just nature but also us financially as well. Example there on the right hand side is the New Zealand flatworm, which is the group of flatworms. I'll come on to why we're really worried about that at the moment, but that's actually taken from the Fair Isle, which I'll give you a small case study in the moment, but for those of you who don't know, the Fair Isle is actually the UK's most distant inhabited island. It's right up on the north of Scotland, in that it is the furthest away from any other inhabited bit of land mass, and the New Zealand flatworm has found its way there, and we now know how. So you might be familiar, hopefully, with our Potwatch campaign, which we've had for a while, and this is really our concern around the trade of potted plants and soil, compost, and the growing media that they come in, and the stowaways that are transported within them. If you can imagine plants, it's fairly easy to check the actual plant themselves for things that are living on the plant. Kind of makes itself quite obvious, but things that are buried and hidden in the soil is not so easy. This is made worse by the fact that our kind of biosecurity measures for checking these don't actually actively look for species such as flatworms. So our Potwatch campaign, we've revamped it a little bit in the past couple of months, coinciding with the GB Non-Native Species Week, where we've been encouraging people to go out and have a look for non-native flatworms. It's quite a nice kind of grouping to go and look for, because people are not necessarily familiar with them, and they look kind of they stand out quite a bit in comparison to other species that people might find in their gardens. And what this is really helping us do is to raise awareness of invasive non-native species. But also to collect data as to where these species are, where they're present, and how they're moving across the country. And as I say, this is where the story around the New Zealand flatworm up in Fair Isle came from, and it was a supporter that saw this campaign. And due to the nature of the island, there's only about 90 inhabitants. They were actually able to put out a message and get almost all of the island going out looking for these things, and it's quite shocking the numbers that they're finding, but they've also been able to kind of trace back to when the first one was seen on the island and how they've spread. So these kind of stories are really useful and really helpful for us to kind of put pressure on the government to improve our biosecurity measures, and that's really where we're kind of working on the policy side of things. We're doing that alongside other environmental groups as well, taking action on other forms of non-native species, whether that be in plants, mammals, or even through kind of diseases and things like that. We're all kind of working together to improve biosecurity measures across the board, and that helps us to really get our message out there. And work with DEFRA and AFA to actually start to address these things. We now sit on the Horticultural Pathway Action Plan group, which is looking at how these are getting into the country as an island. That actually makes it somewhat easier than it does if we're on a continent, as we can start to see where things come in. But obviously they're making their way here, and these need to be addressed. So we sit on that, and Craig McAdam's done quite a bit of work to pressurise that group to create a subgroup specifically looking at stowaways, which is where these most of the terrestrial invertebrates come in, and that differs from looking at the plant health to starting to look at what's actually contained within the soil. So we're on the move there to start to address these things, to start to actually prevent future species from making their way here, particularly around flatworms. Once they're here, very, very hard to, let's say, not impossible to actually remove, simply because they don't have the predators. They breed in a number of different ways and spread very, very quickly. But there are things we can do as individuals as well. Firstly, I'd encourage you to get out and go and have a look in your own gardens, see if you can find any flatworms and report it back to us via the Potluck campaign. I didn't know about these things before I came to Buglife, and I can't seem to move in my vegetable patch now without finding an Australian species of flatworm. So they're here, and they are present, but we need to know that they're present in order to actually start doing something about them. And if you do find them, make sure that you don't start to share your plants. Make sure you don't start to share your compost with friends and family, because that will only increase the spread of them. And where possible, try and buy kind of locally grown plants if you need to buy them, rather than purchasing things off the internet and bringing them in where they haven't necessarily been checked, or from not quite reputable resources. So there are a few things that we can do as individuals as well. Moving on to safe spaces from chemicals, harmful chemicals. This was obviously an area of work that Buglife have been active in for a long period of time now, and the kind of the sort of, I suppose, the little subgroup of that I'm focusing on at the moment is what I would call novel chemicals. And those are the ones that have perhaps not had the attention that they've deserved so far, and more research is being done on them, which is starting to really make us aware of the risk that they pose, particularly to freshwater species, where these chemicals can make their way through to, and also kind of the scale of the problem, just how far these kind of contaminated waters actually are. You'll probably all be quite familiar with microplastics. A lot of attention has been around that over the past 3 years, and a lot more studies been done into that around kind of the plastic problem that we face. But microplastics are something that's obviously finding their way into fresh waters and having an impact on the ecosystems there. pesticides and pesticides commonly used in veterinary medicine for things like flea treatments, for example. You'll have seen some media work that we did towards the back end of last year, which started to highlight just the sheer scale of this problem and how many waterways are actually impacted by these low-level contaminants that are actually designed, to harm invertebrates, and they're now found in our waterways. And then the other area really is pharmaceuticals, so the human medicines, and we are close to sort of releasing a report that looks at similarly the spread of pharmaceuticals through our fresh waters, and just what impact that might be having as well. I'm really here for sort of my area of work is to try and make sure that these novel and low-level contaminants are actually considered within water policy and the attention that's given to water quality. At the moment, there's a lot of attention given to the impact of water quality is having on rivers, in particular in relation to humans bathing, and obviously the increase in things like wild swimming, but just the awareness of the number of sewage overflows that are taking place as well. So really what we're trying to do is make sure that these things aren't forgotten about within that discussion. They're factored into any changes and improvements moving forward, and that actually they're considered within policy to prevent them getting there in the first place. You might wonder how these things actually make their way into our waterways, and our wastewater treatment plants, they're not actually designed to capture these things. They're not designed to filter them out in the same way that they are for the biological matter that makes their way through. So these things pretty much just pass straight through and come out within the freshwater supply that comes out the back end of them. So we're starting to understand that water isn't actually clean, and there's sort of a bit of a missing link there to what happens. So because we're not going to necessarily get complete and utter way of managing that and capturing that, we obviously need to tackle what happens at the sort of the entry point end. We're putting pressure on to try and make sure that there's suitable environmental risk assessments done to these chemicals, whether that be in their kind of their finalized form as the actual drug itself, or whether it's also taking into consideration the breakdown, the compounds that actually make up those chemicals. Because if you can imagine the chemical goes into your body and it gets broken down, it then comes out and it goes through our wastewater treatment work. The actual individual elements of those chemicals and those drugs find their way into our waterways, and can have a bit of a cocktail effect. You'll be familiar with kind of being given warnings not to take certain medicines with other medicines. Well, once these things are broken down, they can then mix back together and have a lethal effect. And these things just aren't considered yet. So we're really putting the sort of the pressure on to try and make sure that these risk assessments are done not just for newly developed medicines, but also for ones that already exist or in widespread usage. And just on the right, there's just some of the ways in which these pharmaceuticals can kind of break down, be used, and work their way into our waterways, and just some things to consider as individuals what we can do at this stage. Firstly, I think we're not going to be telling people to stop using medicines. Obviously they're there and they're really useful for the reasons that they're produced, but the key thing is to making sure you follow the correct directions on how to actually use those medicines, making sure it's the correct dosage. And a really key thing is actually the disposal of medicines. There's this bizarre Hollywood kind of way of showing medicines being disposed of down the toilet, down the sink, which is obviously really, really not the way we want to see things being done. If you do finish using a course of medicines, it's make sure they're being disposed correctly, and you're returning them to your GP or to your pharmacy so they can actually be disposed of in a much better way than just being taken straight out into our environments. And then when it comes to things like flea treatment, for example, it's really being able to challenge your vets as to perhaps more environmentally friendly ways that we might be able to manage fleas and the like, and pests on our kind of companion animals, and starting to act as consumers and kind of using our consumer power to challenge the industry to come up with something better fundamentally. And if you do have to use treatments kind of in the interim, then it's making sure that we're sensible about the way that we limit the exposure of these treatments. You know, if you treat your pets with flea treatment, making sure that the first thing you do is not give it a bath or take it down to the local stream for it can go for a swim, because we know, and there's evidence now, that these chemicals are actually leaching out and into the environment. And if we can cut off that direct way of making into the environment, that's going to help, and that's going to improve. And also considering the way that you kind of handle your pets after giving them the treatment. You know, washing your hands is washing these chemicals straight off and into our waterways as well. So just a few things that we can kind of do whilst we continue to challenge the decision makers to actually make changes in this area of work. And I'll move on to light pollution, which has been, safe to say, keeping me busy over the past few weeks, which I'll explain why. But the first thing I want to do really is to get you to have a little think about the impact that light pollution has on you as an individual, and that is to consider whether you've actually ever seen the Milky Way. The British Astronomical Association assure me that we should be able to see it from here in the UK on a clear night. But actually, evidence and estimates show that about 90% of the population are pretty much unlikely to see the Milky Way on a clear night. And that's fundamentally down to light pollution. Now consider whether that pollution was another form of pollution, whether it was, say, smog or oil or plastics. We would be addressing that really rapidly. It would be something that would be gaining a lot of attention and gaining a lot of action, not just amongst individuals, but with policymakers as well to address that. But for some reason, our relationship with light is pretty much we'll accept that light pollution's there and it's starting to affect us. And it's this anthropogenic form of pollution, and it's just not getting the attention that it deserves. It's impacting us as humans, and we can accept it's there. But this isn't the case for wildlife, and growing evidence is showing that increased artificial light is directly impacting invertebrates in a number of measurable ways. It's impacting the way that they feed, the way that they reproduce, their movement, and just their daily lives. Just quite a shocking stat from Germany is studies done on streetlights. Estimates showed that a third of all insects that were attracted to streetlights actually died as a consequence of being attracted to that streetlight. And when we consider the work that we're all doing on invertebrates to improve and actually reduce and stop and prevent and reverse the insect declines that we're seeing, this is a key area really that actually we can address. The impacts of light pollution aren't just being felt with invertebrates. We're also seeing significant research pinpointing light pollution on the movement and migration of birds, leading to birds' deaths, striking large buildings that are lit up at night, to bats and their ability to roost, their ability to feed, and their ability to move. Plants as well are being directly impacted by light. We use artificial lights to grow plants on huge scales, and there's a reason for that. Some studies actually point to the impact of light pollution on plants being the same or being the equivalent of a 2 degrees Celsius increase in temperature. When we consider the amount of concern that's being given to the 1.5 degrees increase in temperature, actually light pollution is having a really significant impact here. So it's not something that should be being taken lightly, yet it still is. But something that's really nice about light pollution in comparison to the other forms of pollution I've spoken about is that actually once you turn off the light, that pollution's gone. We don't have to go in and we don't have to do a cleanup. Now we can't just advocate for the fact that all lights should be turned off all the time. Lights provide a very useful resource for us, obviously with safety, our ability to do things at night time. But there are steps that we can all take. And we can do this through limiting the amount of light that we're using, limiting the length of time that we're using light, the directions of light, all things that are actually very straightforward to do, and changes that we can all make at an individual level. Even something as simple as closing your curtains at night to eliminate the light casting out across your garden will make a difference and an impact. But as we know, individual action and guidance doesn't always work, and it's only as good as the mass number of people that are doing these things. So there's also the need for robust legislation to help us. And this is something that's really, as I say, been taken kind of quite lightly, pardon pun, over the sort of up until now, really. But things are perhaps starting to change. In the last week, we've tabled an amendment to the Environment Bill to include a statutory target to reduce light pollution across England, which is the scope of the bill. We thank Lord Randall for tabling that amendment, and Lord Carrington, Baroness Birkwell and Lord Taylor for supporting that. And what this would do really is it would challenge the government to actually consider light pollution in the same way that we consider other forms of pollution, and other forms of pollution that are well and truly considered within the Environment Bill. And it would allow us to actually start to set a target to reduce light pollution. And again, making use of some of those quite straightforward mechanisms that we have available to us. So this has been a really exciting kind of development. The amendment's actually going to be debated on Monday. So please do pay attention to our kind of our social media and things like that. We'll make sure we can update you all on that as to how we progress with that. And it's already receiving quite a bit of support. I've been responding to members today who are keen to speak in favour of this amendment, and we've been working with other organisations on this, such as Bat Conservation Trust and the British Astronomical Association's Commission for Dark Skies, and also the Dark Skies APPG. So perhaps we are starting to make a bit of a movement here into actually addressing this as policy and actually helping improve this largely kind of ignored element of pollution. And that's just a snapshot of the work that we're kind of on at the moment. But obviously there's plenty of other things going on, and yeah, do feel free to get in touch on any of our work kind of on advocacy and policy stuff there. And definitely look out on our kind of usual channels for the ways that you can get involved as well, and the actions that you can take as well as helping to support our calls for change in policy. Thank you.
Thanks, David, for that tremendous overview of work around pollution, invasive, some of the bête noire that, of course, anyone working in conservation has got to contend with. Matt, you've been keeping an eye on the YouTube channel and any other questions coming in. Can you see anything from over there?
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions. One is, what's the most invasive species? What's the most invasive species that you're most afraid of arriving here?
Good question. That's great. I think looking at the flatworms, their New Guinea flatworm has made its way all the way from Papua all the way across, and it's now in Europe. It's found in France in significant numbers, which is causing significant loss of native earthworms and snails there. We don't have, certainly not widespread in the UK yet, and it's we haven't had any reports, touch wood, from our latest potwatch thing, but it's expected that could be the next species of flatworm to make its way here. And it's yeah, simply as it's travelled across the world, we do really need to make sure we prevent that from becoming the next species of flatworm to spread across the country.
Thank you, David. We've got another one. Someone's asking, the local park, the sports pitch, shines light all over the place. Is there anything they can do about stopping that?
Sure. So this is where the challenge comes in, really. At the moment, nuisance light is only directed at people, and the impact it has is on you as an individual. So all of the environmental concerns that we have for light pollution is pretty much non-existent within the existing regulation, but you can make the case for the nuisance that it would cause to you as an individual, in the same way that you might have noise pollution and noise keeping you up at night, for example. Obviously, if lights are on and the pitch is being used, well, that's a sensible use of light. What can be done is these lights could be fitted with shields to prevent kind of upwards light and just directed in a much better way than they currently are. And my advice really on that case is to speak with the people that are currently using those lights. More often than not, it's a council or it's a local provider, whether it be a school, and having the conversation, drawing their awareness of the problems that these cause actually makes people take action. And of course, as we continue to kind of push for this to be sort of taken into consideration nationally, that's going to help. So these stories are really important case studies that we can use to show going forward. So definitely just keep letting us know.
We've got a question from Eugenie who's asking, how active are we in international policy, European and global, on these issues?
Sure, brilliant. Yes, so within Europe, we're still able to respond to European consultations and the like, and still put pressure on the legislation that gets made there. So we're obviously making sure that we feed into those as being kind of representing all invertebrates across Europe in particular, and making sure we work with international colleagues who are looking at kind of individual species on these things. We're feeding into things like there's the European zero waste action plan coming forward. As a result, I think as we fed into consultation there, like pollution as an example wasn't considered in the original scope of that, and now it is being considered. So it shows that we actually still have a voice there to be able to do. So we keep looking out for these things and looking to make sure that they are taken consideration internationally. But obviously, we want to make sure that we can lead from the front here at home first and foremost as well, which is definitely going to help.
And I think perhaps with others, we did manage to get some mentions of light pollution in the revised plan for the European Zero Pollution Plan, didn't we?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's it wasn't there, and yeah, it is there now. And we also worked with other groups, Butterfly Conservation Europe, for example, to make sure that they included it within their response to those kind of things. So I'd say we are still very much a voice that's helping to push this cause.
I've got a question from Nina Searle. Would it be possible to lobby supermarkets, etc., about the lights they leave on in their stores at night?
Brilliant. This was something I was thinking about earlier today, actually, is shop lights that are left on throughout the night to display things. Completely unnecessary, and I definitely think that this is something that we can work on. We can look to kind of work with industry to do that. Something we are starting to develop with the Institute of Lighting Professionals is guidance for lighting for species such as or invertebrate species, so that professionals have an actual guidance plan as to how, if they do need to light things, how they can light things in the best possible way. But again, I think it's raising awareness is really crucial to drive change, as we've seen with many other things within the conservation sector over the years. And on the lighting in storefronts, there's a really interesting guys in, I think, Paris, who use street running and parkour to turn off street lights. I'm not necessarily advocating for that, but it's something that's kind of transitioning into all other sectors to go, this is just an unnecessary use of energy and a waste of energy, and let's turn off those lights. So it is actually something that others are considering as well. So
I think that's one of the really interesting win-win areas, actually, because if we are reducing energy outputs, you're helping organizations contribute to net zero, you're reducing their operating costs. And if they're also making switches to lower energy light outputs, likely LEDs, you can also start to work with the wavelengths of light that are likely to be less damaging to invertebrates. So I think selling some of this in a win-win way trimming light is in the end good for the economy, good for the environment, good for business. I think there are really interesting opportunities. Just one other one to go back to, David, on the pharmaceuticals and microplastic dimension. One of the areas I'd be interested to look at is around the whole CSO debate, remembering that we're increasingly realizing quite a lot of wastewater goes into the aquatic environment without going through wastewater treatment works. And at the moment, a lot of the risk assessment of that is around the frequency with which combined sewer overflows spill. Actually, we've got to know far more about what it is exactly that they are spilling. And I think some of the clues around pharmaceuticals and other things reaching the freshwater environment will come from the assessment of that area. And it's another hot one that Buglife and others could get involved with. So, any other questions or comments for David? Otherwise, David, thank you for all of that. These are hugely important issues that you've told us about. They are ways of engaging people in appropriate ways to raise interest around what they can do to help invertebrates. And as we've just addressed, in ways that are win-wins. If things are good for invertebrates, quite often they're good for the way we live our lives as well. So, David, thank you for that. I'm now going to move us on to our last speaker of the afternoon, Ross Piper. Many people will know of Ross from his media work, but before that, he started off working on, as many invertebrate biologists do, beetles. As we all know, there are probably more beetle taxa than any other invertebrate type. So it's inevitable that at some point in our professional lives as entomologists, we come across beetles. I'm delighted to tell you also that Ross has links with whales, both with Bangor and with Aberystwyth in various ways. But I think what he's here to do today is tell us about his new book, How to Read an Insect, a smart guide to what insects do and why. And I think, Ross, that came out fairly recently, but you'll be telling us about that and other things. And we are now with you for the next 45, 50 minutes or so.
Okay, many thanks for the intro, Steve. Yeah, so and thanks to for David and Claire for those interesting presentations too. Very interested to see some of that stuff, especially the stuff on light pollution. I'll just share my screen with you. Bear with me. Yeah, so shameless plug here. This is my new book that's coming out. I think it came out on the 17th actually. This is the UK edition. The edition for North America has got a different cover and a slightly different title. This book primarily is really an intro to the fascinating ways in which insects live, because that's what's always really fascinated me. Beyond just finding things, it's trying to think about how these things live and what they do, because a lot of time that's what people most often people don't understand, that these small animals have these really complex lives. So we'll just crack on through some of the examples I've got here. Then the first slide here, this just shows a tiny egg parasitoid.
Ross, just before you go on, at the moment we are seeing the presenter view of your screen. There we go. Thank you. We can now see the whole screen appropriately. So if you want to go to your view options, you can fiddle with it. Sorry to interrupt you.
It's okay. Can you see? What can you see at the moment?
We're seeing an expanded image of your screen, but I think we're still seeing the presenter view.
Okay, wait a second.
If you go to your view options, I think there we go. I think that's probably, no, I think we're still seeing.
Okay, wait a sec. What about now? Is that, can you just see the slides there, or can you see? The problem is if I go onto slide share and do the presentation view, you're getting the notes as well.
Yeah, correct. And I think that's the view we don't wish to see. And I'm also not sure. Are you on slideshow at the moment?
Yeah, if I go into slideshow, then you see, what can you see now?
We're on slideshow, but we're seeing your notes. But I think if you go to view options, you can amend that.
Okay, where are view options? And sorry, Steve.
Top of the screen.
Top of the screen.
Confusingly, it's different on YouTube. If you just try slideshow, I'll tell you whether it looks okay on YouTube.
What can you see now?
YouTube takes a little while to respond. Hold on. No, it's showing the notes on YouTube as well now. It's very odd.
Sorry, chaps, I can't see the. Wait a minute.
I think sometimes do you have two screens, Ross?
Yeah, I do have two screens.
That's what it is.
The other screen, okay?
That's what it is. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's try that now. Wait a minute.
Looks very interesting from what we can see anyway.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, I can't see the blooming. Okay, what about now?
No, we see still notes.
I'm just seeing a corner of your PowerPoint, and a large part of my view is your notes.
Yeah.
Oh, weird. Okay, wait a minute. View. Well, if you want, what about if we just go with this version here? Like, so if I go through now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Works.
Is that okay?
Yeah, you could unpin the top toolbar. That little arrow, if you go to the right, and there's that little arrow, that makes it smaller, yeah.
Okay, lovely. Okay. Sorry about that, chaps.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Thank you for pointing that out. Because I was doing this the other day, and then with that same thing on my computer, then it wasn't on the shared one. Anyway, so the book is all about the extraordinary diversity of the lives of insects. As a little bit of a background, insects have been around for an extraordinarily long period of time, probably as far back as maybe 500 million years, so 500 million years. They evolved from crustaceans. The closest living ancestors amongst the living crustaceans are things called fairy shrimps, cephalocarids, and these weird remipedes that live in caves that are very rare today. They were the first group of animals that took to the air around 400 million years ago. And all the groups that we see today, they were all established around about 350 million years ago. So it's an extraordinarily ancient group of animals. And in that time, they've exploited every sort of conceivable niche there is on land. You can find them everywhere, doing all sorts of incredible things. So of the ones we have, of that diversity today, we have around just over 1 million known species, but there are millions more out there still to describe. But describing something, putting a name to it, that's really the thin end of the wedge. Trying to figure out, how these things live, what other organisms they interact with. That's, for me, that is much more the fascinating side of things. And of those, the enormous species that have been described, even over 1 million species, we've only really looked in any detail at a relatively small number of those. Often the ones that either, spread disease, the ones that maybe eat our crops or are pests of our livestock. The rest, the lives are more or less unknown. So the most specious groups we touched on, obviously the beetles, the enormous group, the butterflies and moths, the wasps, ants and bees, and the flies. Now, I think in the fullness of time, I think it will turn out actually that wasps, ants and bees and the flies are actually more specious than the beetles. It's just that fewer people work on them. But I think in the fullness of time, we'll find out there's many more species of those groups. Beetles have always been super popular amongst collectors, hence why there's so many species known. But to many people, even people interested in nature, if you talk to them about, what do insects do or what are they for, what do they get up to? On the whole, people only sort of think about them as food for bigger animals. They don't really think about these, these tiny little beings having their own sort of very interesting lives. Obviously they know about their place in the food chain. and they, you know, eat different plants, and then these insects are fed on by larger animals. But on the whole, I don't think about the sort of fascinating lives of these animals, and that's what I really want to try and get across with the stuff that I do, whether it's books and whatever else, is trying to tell some stories about these animals, and just try and shed a light on how extraordinarily interesting they are. One of the problems is, though, that, you know, these animals are just really small, and so they tend to be overlooked. That's one reason people tend to overlook them, and that, you know, that they're masters of miniaturization. This is a tiny fairy wasp from my garden. This one is what, about 0.8 millimeters long, but they get much smaller. The smallest ones can be only 0.14 millimeters. And at that scale, you know, these animals, these complex animals, composed of tens of thousands of cells, these are actually much smaller than many single-celled organisms. And how do they get all that complexity in these like tiny packages? Like if you think of the brain of this animal here, this tiny fairy wasp, the brain might only be composed of around 4,000 cells, but even with that tiny brain, it's able to do some really complex things. It's able to navigate through a very large landscape. It's able to find mates. It's able to find hosts. It's able to do that, but with a very tiny body. You know, this thing has fundamentally all the same organ systems as you or I. It's got a complex central nervous system. It's got a gut. It's got the insect equivalent of the kidneys. It's got a way of getting gases in and out of the body. It's got all that, but in that tiny package. And this is an intense area of research at the moment, trying to figure out exactly how these tiny animals do that with these very small brains. There's a lot of groups that are developing new artificial intelligence algorithms based on the brains of these organisms, and also new systems for controlling autonomous drones. Because these tiny animals can do all these complex things, but in a tiny package. By the way, the weird wings of this animal here, with these weird fringes of bristles on the edge of the wings here, this is all about the viscosity of air at this scale. For these animals, moving through the air is much more akin to paddling through water. So it's a much different mode of locomotion. This is another one that I found in my garden again the other day. This is another egg parasitoid, and again you can see the scale of this compared to the tip of a 0.5 millimeter pencil, one of these little clutch pencils. So you can see, you know, and there's loads of these things that are all around us. You could go with a sweep net and put this net through any bit of, like, you know, vegetation, whether it's a meadow or maybe a hedgerow, and you'd find hundreds, possibly thousands of these sorts of animals. That's super abundant, and very little is known about them apart from, you know, broadly what they do. These ones are often egg parasitoids, but the other intricacies of their lifestyles are often unknown. So when it comes to thinking about, you know, the intricacies of insect lifestyles, some of the most amazing examples when we look at how insects reproduce. The first one I want to touch on here is the small cabbage white. So this is a really familiar butterfly. I can guarantee you've all seen these. And it was only recently, a few years back, people started to look more closely at the way in which these reproduce. So lots of insects, the males will want to incentivize mating, so they want to attract a mate, and they often do this by offering the female a thing called a spermatophore. So on the left there, you can see the spermatophore coating, which is really a sort of nutritious sort of protein coat that surrounds the male sperm. Now, this elaborate structure is made inside the female's reproductive tract by the male during the mating process, which might go on for 20, 30 minutes or so. So the female is able to break apart this spermatophore using what is effectively a pair of jaws in her reproductive tract. These jaws will chew up the spermatophore, release the nutrients, and weirdly, her reproductive tract also acts like a stomach because it needs to be able to digest the spermatophore when it's been chewed up by this specialized structure called the signum. And then what can also happen, in addition to a spermatophore, some male insects can give the female some defensive compounds. Instead of just a spermatophore, the male can, during the mating process, he gives the female a dose of these defensive toxins, in this case, which is oil beetles, cantharidin. So the cantharidin after mating spreads through the female's body to give her some level of protection against her own predators. And this is quite common, especially in beetles, where these defensive chemicals are spread during the process of mating. And what we also see you often see some really remarkable examples of ornamentation in male insects. Often the exact function of these is unknown, and it's not really well known exactly what's going on. This is a really nice example of that. These are 3 wasp species you find in this country. So on the left here we have Crabro crabarius, middle Crabro praltarius, and then we've got on the right here Crabro scutulatus. Now only the males have these really elaborate tibial shields, okay, with these distinctive species specific patterns on them. Now it's not completely known, but it's thought that when these insects are mating, so the male puts these tibial shields over the female's eyes, and in doing that, it gives the female it's almost a way of her being able to recognise that he's the right species, because often you can have among insects where males would try and mate with the wrong the female of a different species. This is thought to be some degree of species recognition, but also maybe gives the female an idea of the fitness of the male if the tibial shields are big and well formed. Again, this species on the left is quite a common one and quite easy to find, especially in sort of sandy habitats. And what we also see some really remarkable examples, especially in the flies, of where you have sexual role reversal. So these insects here, these are called dance flies. So the females have these elaborate hairy legs and also these abdomens that are often flattened out with these big air sacs that can be inflated in flight. Now, this is all about trying to make the female's abdomen look as big and as broad as possible. The legs are arranged at the borders of the abdomen to make it look as broad as possible from below, because in these dance flies, it's the males that select the females, which is quite unusual. And we also see the same sort of thing, sexual role reversal, in these really interesting cave bark lice. So what happens here is that in these cave habitats, food is in really short supply. So the females want to compete to try and get the male spermatophore, the thing that I mentioned earlier, this nutritious bunch of protein and sperm. So the females are competing for these spermatophores in this species, and they've actually evolved almost like a pseudopenis, which you can see here. So they're actually mating with the male to try and get a hold of his spermatophore. This is a nice example that he's been well looked at by a group in Japan, where the actual mechanics of what's going on here has been well understood. But there's lots more examples out there that haven't really been studied in any detail. And what we also see, which is very common, you can see this if you look at it in your gardens or if you're out for a walk, often you see it among beetles like dock beetles, Gastrophysa viridula. You'll see a male and a female mating. And then you'll see another male come along, like in this case, this is actually Cryptocephalus labiatus. You'll see another male come along and he'll try and get rid of the male that's currently mating because he wants to have a go. And this is extremely common. Lots of beetles do it where you have these spoiling tactics. Sometimes there'll be a whole queue of like males lined up trying to spoil the sort of mating efforts of one male. Such as the competition to try and ensure that they get their gene spread to the next generation. So from the intricacies of reproduction, there are some really remarkable examples of just how far female insects go to provision and look after their offspring. Often we don't really think of insects as being good parents, but some of them actually go to some incredible lengths to look after their offspring. My favorite of all these, I think, is the bee wolf. The bee wolf used to be a real rarity in the UK. But it's now, with climate change, it's spreading rapidly. I think it's been recorded as far north as Yorkshire now on sandy habitats. Now, this insect, this is the female bee wolf here. Her prey are honeybees. And so she seeks out specifically honeybees that she will find while they're trying to find nectar and pollen on different plants. She will tackle them, often to the ground, sting them and inject some venom. The venom is extremely interesting in its own right because it causes an irreversible paralysis and does lots of other things in the body of the honeybee too that haven't been well researched either. And then it has to fly back with the honeybee back to the nest. And it does this multiple times. The nest is made in sandy ground. It's often a complex burrow with intervals. You'll find these brood chambers. along the burrow. And within each brood chamber, the female bee wolf leaves 1 to 3 honeybees. In this particular case, there are 2 paralyzed honeybees. When she leaves them in the brood chamber, what she does is really interesting. And all of this stuff that I'm going to show you in the next couple of minutes was found out by a group in Germany over a period of about 10 years. Just because they asked one question, what does this insect do when it goes underground? And they found out an amazing way that they could study it in captivity using these cages they made. And they could see these, see these brood chambers and exactly what happened underground. And this, for me, this is a brilliant example of natural history at its best. These people were able to find out all these incredible things, and it led to loads of really interesting high impact papers. One of the first amazing things they found is the female bee wolf, when she takes the honeybees underground, she licks each one all over, coating it with these secretions from the glands in her head. And it was thought these secretions were probably antibacterial or antifungal. They are, but they work in a really interesting way, because what happens is they seal up any cavities and any small imperfections on the surface of the honeybee. So there's nowhere where water can condense. And because water can't condense on a honeybee underground, bacteria and fungi have a really hard time of trying to grow there. And ultimately, they can't really destroy the honeybee in any way, which is a prey for the female bee wolf's offspring. The thing in the center, this thing is the sausage-shaped egg of the bee wolf. So the bee wolf finishes the brood chamber. Once it's almost finished and she's about to seal it up, she then does another really amazing thing. Again, this was found out by the same team in Germany. She leaves a daubing from her antennae. Now you can see these little white bits of what look like paste here. Now these are actually bacteria that are cultured inside special cavities within her antennae. It turns out there are a species that's unique to bee wolves. It's a species called Streptomyces philanthi. And she leaves a daubing of these symbiotic bacteria on the wall of the brood chamber. Then she seals it completely and she leaves, and she'll never have anything else to do with her offspring in that brood chamber. So the egg hatches, the bee wolf egg hatches. This is the larva here. It hatches and eventually pupates. Now, as it's pupating, what it does, it incorporates some of those bacterial symbionts into its cocoon. So it anoints itself with these symbiotic bacteria, and it turns out these things are protective. So these symbiotic bacteria produce lots of antibiotics that inhibit the growth of bacteria and fungi, because this is the really vulnerable stage in the life of this animal, when it's a fully grown larva and then it pupates. During this time, especially if it's wet and especially humid, there's a very good chance that it will die due to pathogenic fungi and bacteria. But the special symbiotic bacteria that have been left by the female bee wolf, these give the larvae and the pupa an element of protection from these enemies. And as I say, all of these incredible things were found out by just asking this one question, what is going on underground? And they found all this amazing stuff out. And this is really, I'm only giving you the top end stuff here. There was loads more too. So it's really worth thinking about this, because the bee wolf is a type of solitary hunting wasp, and globally there's around 20,000 species of those. This is one of the few of that 20,000 species that's been studied in any detail. So you just think about, what else is out there still to be discovered, just with really a willingness to go out and look and just observe. This is a nice example of parental care, a bit more gruesome perhaps. So dung beetles, as their name suggests, they normally feed on dung. But this species from South America called Canthon virens has become a predator, and a specialist predator of new leafcutter ant queens. So she seeks out the new leafcutter ant queens when they're about to establish a nest. Obviously, there must have been some overlap in the odor cues the dung beetles use to find dung, because they've switched from dung to a completely different type of food, in this case, other insects. They catch one of the leafcutter ant queens here, and they use the front part of their clypeus of their head here to saw its head off. So it decapitates the queen leafcutter ant, and then it stows it in an underground nest, in the same way as a bee wolf, and her larvae will feed on the body of the leafcutter ant queen. This example for me is really amazing because it shows evolution in action. It shows a complete shift from one foodstuff to another. It's probably happened in a relatively short period of time. Other dung beetles do similar things with millipedes, but they're in the minority. Obviously, most of the dung beetles will feed on dung. These ones, though, have adapted to feed on something completely different. And it's just mind-blowing to think, this thing can seek out, this very, very specific prey, and then do all these elaborate things with them, cut the head off the female leafcutter ant, dig these elaborate nests, and prepare the leafcutter ant in a certain way down in the brood chamber for her larvae to feed on. There's just so many, when you think about some of the ways that insects live, there are just so many fascinating lifestyles now. There's so much drama as well. You think about often on TV shows, nature TV shows, it's always about the big mammals and things, but there's so much drama in these small packages. It's just that they're overlooked, but there's so many fascinating things going on. Now, another group that shows quite a bit of maternal care, a group of beetles that's very close to my heart. This is a genus called Cryptocephalus, commonly called pot beetles. I studied these for my PhD, and they're fascinating, not least of all because of what the female does with her eggs. So the female, she coats each of the eggs that she lays, and she lays maybe up to 100 or more eggs. She coats each of those eggs in these special little fecal plates. You can see her doing it here with her back legs. So she rolls the egg around and around until it's completely coated, until it's like this. And so you've got what looks like a little fir cone, and that's a fully formed egg case. And each egg case is distinctive to that particular species of Cryptocephalus beetle. Once she's finished it, she flicks the egg case away down into the leaf litter. The larva eventually hatches inside the egg case, and it carries the egg case around with it like a little portable home and keeps adding to it until what you've got is this lovely little larval case that looks like a little flask or a pot. They're sometimes given the name pot beetles for that reason. So yeah, I mean, beetles on the whole are not really well known for their maternal care, but these are some really nice examples of just what lengths they go to. It takes the female pot beetle perhaps like 15-20 minutes to make each one of these egg cases. So after she's mated, this is what she'll spend the rest of her life doing, making these egg cases and trying to give her offspring just the best chance she can in life. So you've got all these ways in which animals reproduce and the ways in which they try and look after their young, or try and provision their young anyway. We've also got some really mind-bending life cycles out there, because when we think of the life cycles of animals, of insects, we're hard-grained to think of things like, just butterflies, where you've got, an egg that goes through a caterpillar, pupae, and then the adult. But amongst some of the more obscure beetles, you've got some really beautiful examples of just some really crazy lifestyles. This group here, these are called the telephone pole beetles. They're found in North America. Well, they've got a really elaborate lifestyle that's mostly asexual, so they never really have sex. Most of the time, it's just these weird female larvae that reproduce as larvae. They keep reproducing more female larvae. Occasionally, that can be triggered by temperature changes. These female larvae can give birth to a male larva that then consumes the mother that gave birth to it and can develop into a male. But this is very rare. Males are really, really rare in these beetles. And this is just one example of one of these complex life cycles that's been well studied. You can probably imagine how long it takes to figure out this life cycle. I mean, just presenting it here in this diagram from current biology, a little bit glosses over how much work went into this. This is probably like years, even decades of research trying to figure out exactly what goes on and how it all plays out and how you get from an egg to new adults. Another really nice example of a really complex and really fascinating life cycle are animals that we have in this country. These are called Strepsiptera. This is one I found on the windowsill in my office. I've twisted this picture around because of the sad face. It looks like a sad face on the. This is the female parasite living inside the abdomen of this bee. So this is the front part of her body. She will never leave the host. She got in there as a larvae from a tiny thing called a triangulin. She ends up taking up nearly the whole space inside the abdomen of the bee. You can see her body here. This is the abdomen of the the bee here, and inside you can see the strepsipteran female. Now, the male strepsipteran has to find this female. So the female is not going anywhere. She's inside that host the whole time. And it's the male that has to do the looking. And he's got a really short period of time in which to do that. Some of these male strepsipterans might only live for like 2 hours. In that time, they've got to try and find a female and to mate. And to do that, they've got wings, obviously, to fly. And they've also got these big, elaborate antennae and these very unusual sort of almost like raspberry-like eyes to find the female inside the host. Often, well, most of them won't make it. You know, you only need 1 or 2 to be able to do this. You can actually see the male here who's mating with the female while she's still in the host. She'll then go on to produce a load of triangulin larvae that will go and find new hosts and continue the life cycle. And again, this is one of these really complex life cycles that has only been found out by, you know, some dedicated entomologists who've devoted their lives and their careers trying to study these things. And when we look at some of the even smaller animals, at the very start, I showed you some of the very small egg parasitoids. These have, and again, this was only worked out in relatively recent years. These egg parasitoids have a really complex life cycle and have a really unique way of getting around a problem. The problem is their body is so tiny, they can only produce a small number of eggs. And they need to produce more eggs, but their body obviously can't do that. So what happens is they go through this unique process inside the body of the host, where a single egg gives rise to loads of clones. So it goes through a period of differentiation into lots of different embryos that are all clones of each other. But what happens then is really interesting, because you have what is essentially a division of labor. Some of those clone larvae become soldiers, and you can see one here. Now, these soldiers will wander through the egg or the larvae of the host, depending on the particular species in question. And it will feed on other parasitoids that have already infected that host. And then the other larvae, the normal larvae of the egg parasitoid, they'll go on to develop into fully formed wasps eventually. The soldier larvae are effectively dead ends. They're just there to protect the other clones in this particular host. You can see more pictures there. That's a soldier there, and that's a normal larvae of one species. And you can actually see a soldier there attacking the larva of another parasitoid inside the host. And, you know, you think about what sort of scale this is taking place on. You know, the adult wasp is a fraction of a millimeter long. All of this crazy stuff is happening, you know, at sub-millimeter scales. And it's that complexity in these tiny little spaces that always completely bamboozles me. And I think, you know, anyone who learns this stuff for the first time will be similarly bamboozled, I think. So you've got all these ways in which insects reproduce, and then all these really elaborate lifestyles. Often insects are on the menu for all sorts of different animals, and they've evolved some really incredible defenses to try and give them a bit of a chance out there in the big, cruel, wide world. One of my favorites, again, goes back to the bee wolf I was talking about earlier. So the bee wolf provisions these complex nests on the ground with honeybees. Now, these nests are going to be really attractive to lots of other insects, one of which is the specialist cuckoo of the bee wolf. This is a thing called Hedicrum rutilans. This is something we can now find on the safe coast of the UK. It's something that's recently spread from the continent. Now, these cuckoo wasps, as that's called, or jewel wasps, whatever you want to call them, are cuckoos because they have to get to the nest of a nest maker, and they destroy the egg or the larvae of the nest maker, lay their own egg, and their larvae will then feed on the provisions that have been laid down there by the nest maker. Now, this one has to get into the nest of the bee wolf, and that is no mean feat. If this cuckoo is found in the nest of the bee wolf female will attack it and kill it. So it needs some sort of protection from the bee wolf. And it does that by smelling exactly like the bee wolf. So the cuticle, so the exoskeleton of this, produces different secretions that give it almost like a cloak of odor. So it smells exactly like the bee wolf. So it can wander around in the nest of the bee wolf with impunity. In the darkness of the nest, you know, the bee wolf can't rely on her eyesight. She can't rely, because it's pitch black down there. She can only rely on odor, and she's only going to smell herself, because this thing smells exactly like her. So unless she blunders directly into it, she will never know it was there. And again, this one interaction here, so between the cuckoo and the bee wolf, is probably one of the few examples that have been studied in any detail of this chemical mimicry between these cuckoos and their hosts. Some other really remarkable adaptations in terms of defense, and probably one of my favorite genera of beetles. I forgive you if you haven't seen any of these. They're quite small. They range between 3 and about 5 millimeters long. This is a genus of road beetles called Stenus. In the UK alone, we have about 72 species in this genus. And some of them live in sort of waterside habitats. And they've got a unique way of getting away from danger. What they do if they feel threatened, they'll step onto the water, and because they're so tiny, they're supported by the surface tension. But what they can do, they can squirt a special compound out of their back end, out of some anal glands, which is a surfactant. So it destroys the surface tension behind them, and in doing so, it propels them forward at a ridiculous speed, equivalent to maybe like 1,000 miles an hour in human terms. So in a fraction of a second, they can cover like 1-2 meters. That enables them to get away from the danger. Yeah, so and you can see this happening if you've ever found that some of these beetles, some of the species that live in waterside habitats, you can see them doing this, and it's incredible to see because it's so quick. It's almost lightning fast. And then amongst even some more obscure animals, these are midge larvae. These are photos from a friend of mine, Andy Murray. I've never actually seen any of these midge larvae like this. What they can do, they can create these big elaborate pom-poms and balloons from secretory hairs on their body. You can see some of the secretory hairs and some of the droplets of fluid on there. On the front end and the back end, they can produce these big yellow pom-poms, these big balloons. And these are almost like decoys. So they're very sort of weakly attached. If another insect, a specialist predators of these animals tries to grab one of the larvae, it can drop these, almost a bit like when a lizard can drop its tail. So it's a bit like that, really. And also there might be some toxins involved here where they might sort of gum up the mouth parts of predators to give them another level of protection from their enemies. And amongst the aphids too, we don't even think of the aphids having much in the way of defense. We see aphids on plants and they're getting attacked by all sorts of animals, whether it's ladybird larvae, hoverfly larvae, but there are some, especially these social aphids, some of which live in galls, that have evolved these incredible adaptations to deal with their enemies. So these species here from Japan, if the gall in which they live, if it gets pierced or broken by a predator, they rupture their bodies, so they effectively commit suicide to seal up the hole in the gall with their hemolymph. And it creates a gummy, sort of glowy plug that eventually hardens to make their home safe again. And in some other species of aphid, there are specialist soldiers that have evolved spikes on their front parts of their body that they jab into enemies. You can see them, some of them doing it here, jabbing these frontal spikes into a lacewing larva that can indeed kill these predators too. So it's a really effective defense. And you don't really think about that when you think about things like aphids, because you normally just see them getting eaten by things. But in some aphids, they've also evolved some incredible defenses. So we've looked at ways in which these different animals, these small animals, can defend themselves. And when we think about insect feeding, there are some remarkable ways in which these animals go about feeding. Most insects are herbivores, but then obviously there's a huge number out there that are predators too. Amongst the herbivores, some of the really remarkable things that have been learned in recent years, things like bumblebees. This was found out by a group in Switzerland fairly recently, where in the early part of the year, if there are insufficient flowers on the plants in the places where they're foraging, the bumblebee workers will go and actually damage the plants they normally feed on, and they damage the plants in such a way that it encourages the plant to produce flowers. You can see the worker bumblebee here. She's piercing the leaf with her tongue. You see it again here as well. And so these things are effectively gardening. They're engineering their sort of local habitat to produce more food for themselves. And if that isn't incredible, I don't know what is. And then amongst the insects, you can see lots of examples of this in the UK. Galls, plant galls. So this is a type of gall called an oak apple. I'm sure you've probably all seen one of these grown on oak, especially this time of year. They're very conspicuous. Now these things are effectively produced by insects. So in this case, types of parasitoid wasps have evolved to become specialist herbivores. So they lay their eggs into growing parts of the plant. It might be a leaf bud. And whatever they inject with the egg, and again, this is something that isn't well known, it's not well understood exactly what they inject with the egg can sort of hijack the machinery of the plant to make it produce this structure instead of things like flowers, new twigs, new leaves. The plant doesn't want to produce this. It's a massive waste of resources, but it ends up becoming a special, almost like a creche for the larvae of the wasp. So not only have they got loads of food surrounding them, they're also deep down in this tissue and protected from some of their enemies. But as I say that, there are also lots of other parasitoid wasps that have evolved specifically to attack these gall formers deep down in their galls by using long egg-laying tubes and either just chewing directly into the gall. I think for me, these are some of the most interesting examples of interactions of insects with other organisms. The fact that these wasps, the female wasps, and they're laying their eggs, can somehow hijack the plant to make it do its own bidding to produce these singular structures. And then what we can also see amongst a few insects, often when you think about insects, they're there just getting eaten by all sorts of different larger animals, whether it's birds, mammals, different amphibians. Some insects have actually turned the tables on these predators. One example being here are these Epomis carabid larvae. The adult beetles also feed on frogs and toads. But what's really interesting here is that the Epomis larvae, so the beetle larva, effectively attracts the small frog or the small toad by waving its tail around. The frog or toad thinks it's going to get like an easy snack, and it tries to swallow the beetle larva. But it's got the beetle larva has got these huge recurved mandibles, and it grips on to the beetle's throat, and eventually to the amphibian's throat, and eventually the amphibian has to regurgitate it, and then the beetle larvae starts feeding on the poor amphibian, and the adult beetles also do something similar, but they just attack the amphibians directly. And you can see the difference in size, the disparity in size here, between this small beetle larva and this enormous prey item. And then again, back to the Stenus rove beetles. These animals are really blessed in the blessed in the amazing adaptations department, because they not only can they move on the surface of water like little miniature jet skis, they've also got telescopic mouth parts. So in a bit like similar to the way a chameleon's mouth parts work, a chameleon can shoot out its tongue. These things have mouth parts that are a bit like an old style car aerial. So it's telescopic, and it can be shot out really quickly, almost to half the length of the animal. So these things, you imagine these things wandering around in low vegetation, either on like blades of grass, and they can use this long telescopic mouth parts to grab things like maybe mites or springtails or maybe aphids, and they're then retracted back to the sharp mandibles. And you can see here with this even more detailed scanning electron micrograph, you can see the structures on the surface at this very end of the mouth parts, where you've got these sticky pads and also these bristles here that give a good grip onto the prey, so it can be dragged back to the beetle. And again, these things are really, really common in the UK. Loads of species. You can go out and you can, using the right techniques, you can find these, and you can see them doing some of these incredible things. And then we also have really weird insects, these beaded lacewings, that effectively produce toxic farts to kill their prey. So these things are specialist predators of things like termites, and they can kill maybe 2, 3, 4 termites in one go by producing these really noxious gases from their back end that knocks the termites out and enables the termite to feed on them. This was found out quite a long time ago, but you can guarantee there are loads more examples like this of these, just these really singular adaptations. And then amongst the things like butterflies and moths that we often assume to be pretty benign animals, some of the moths have evolved to feed on things like fruit. So they've evolved a proboscis that is used to pierce the tough rinds of different fruits. And then some of these again have evolved the ability with this toughened proboscis to either pierce the body of vertebrates, big vertebrates, things like tapirs or elephants, or even drink directly the tears of sleeping birds. So these moths in South America, they'll tickle the eyelid of the bird to make it open its eye, and they'll slot their little proboscis inside, sometimes sweeping the proboscis across the surface of the eye to make the bird produce more tears, and they'll drink the tears. Obviously, the tears has lots of nutrients in it that the moth just loves to get a hold of. So yeah, and again, these things have only been like sort of figured out in relatively recent times. So you think about all the other like odd ways, odd bizarre ways in which insects are out there making their own little livings. So in addition to all, you know, all the standard stuff that I've just sort of used some examples to explore there. What I'm always blown away by are some of the remarkable interactions between insects and completely unrelated organisms. We touched on one earlier when we looked at the bee wolf and the symbiotic bacteria that are cultured in its antennae. We also have some remarkable interactions here between, and this is a thing you can see in the UK. This is a thing called a ship timber beetle. These are quite common in different parts of the UK. So when the female, this is the female here, when she's laying eggs, she coats each egg, she gives it a thin coating of fungal spores. The fungi are actually a type of yeast. The larvae, when it hatches from its egg, will carry some of these yeast down below the bark of the tree, which is what they feed on. They'll then excavate a tunnel, but they don't feed on the bark or the tree of the wood. What they feed on are the yeast. And so they want to cultivate the yeast in the tunnels. And so what you will end up seeing in a tree that's freshly infested, you'll see these tunnels lined with a thin film of these yeasts, giving it a sort of whitish yellowy color. And they'll be feeding on the yeast. And they need to keep conditions in the tunnels completely optimal. And so they have to make sure that the tunnel is clear of debris and other things, so there's a good circulation of air in there. And it's, you know, just a really nice example of this really close mutualism that's grown up between these two completely unrelated things. The yeast gets access to food, you know, can feed on the wood inside the tunnel made by the larva of the beetle, and the beetle then in turn can feed on the yeast. So things like the leafcutter ants are well known for their mutualisms with different fungi for breaking down plant matter, but this is another really nice example of an insect farming another species for its own benefit. And then these things here, these are potter wasps. We have some in this genus in this country. This is a genus called Para-Ancistosaurus, but we have plenty of the Ancistosaurus genus in our country. What is weird with these ones is that you can see on the back end of the female here, you can see this little cluster of what appear to be this sort of paley substance here. These are actually mites. And so you can see them here, the mites gathered into this special recess on the body of the female. These things are effectively a sexually transmitted disease. So the male starts off with them, and then during mating, they crawl onto the body of the female. And that's because the mites want to get into the nest that a female will make. These things make their nest often in sort of hollow stems and other sort of habitats. She'll make a series of brood chambers in there, and there will be mites in each one of those brood chambers. Weirdly though, as the female wasp larvae are developing, they consume all the mites in their brood chamber, but the males don't. So the mites then get onto the body of the male before he leaves to start his adult life, and then they'll be transmitted onto the body of the female during mating. This was first found out in probably the early 1960s, but no one's really worked on it since to try and figure out exactly what's going on there. You know, what is the exact interaction between the mites and the wasps here? I think it's just a really nice example of, you know, something where someone could probably spend, you know, most of their career working on this, trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And then this is a really nice example too of an interaction between a plant and an insect for the plant's own benefit. So in South Africa, you have this, are sometimes called creosote bushes, that produce these seeds that have a really sort of really close similarity to dung of ungulates, and even smell like dung. So that completely dupes dung beetles. Dung beetles like fly over to the seeds when they fall onto the ground, and they'll roll them off. They'll roll them off, bury them in the ground in their tunnels and their brood chambers, thinking they're dung, and so it's going to provision their young. But what they've actually done, they've actually created these perfect conditions for germination for this plant. That's what the dung of so the dung beetle normally goes for dung like this, and so there's a very sort of close similarity here between the seeds of this plant and the dung. But it's not really the shape, it's more about the odor mimicry again. So somehow over time, this plant has evolved an odor that is very similar to the dung that's really liked by the dung beetle. So, I mean, that has just really been a sort of whistle-stop tour of, like, you know, some of the things that I find amazing amongst the lifestyles of insects. But as I said, you know, there's still so much to learn out there. we've barely scratched the surface, really. I think, it's one thing being able to like put a name to a species, but that, as I said, that's really the thin end of the wedge. Trying to figure out how these things live, for me, is much more interesting. That for me is where the fascination is, and I think that's where we can sort of really establish these stories and make these things out to be, really complex, interesting animals for other people to enjoy. Because often they don't see them as that; they just see them as like food for other animals, but they've got their lives in their own right. So there's lots of things that we can do to try and fill in these blanks. And this is something anyone can contribute to. You don't have to be a professional entomologist or ecologist. This is something anyone can contribute to. I think entomology is amazing because it's really accessible. You don't really need any specialist gear. All you need really are sort of patience and the ability to just want to observe things. With that example I showed before with the bee wolf, all that came down to really was just patience and observation. There wasn't anything else going on there, and just the ability to ask questions. So the questions we can ask about anything we see, even the common things in the UK. When I showed the example at the start of the small cabbage white, that's a really common butterfly, but it wasn't until fairly recently that people figured out these really remarkable intricacies of its reproductive life cycle, reproduction. So some of the questions we can ask are, where exactly does something live? How and where do they reproduce? What do they eat, and what eats them? And trying to establish these links between these different organisms, these interactions, for me, are what makes entomology so interesting, because it's almost limitless. I think I find it endlessly fascinating because there's so much still to discover. I think you could devote an army of scientists, and it would take them literally thousands of years to figure out how all these things live and exactly what they're doing. And I think that's more or less it from me.
Great stuff. Thank you, Ross, for that tremendous insight into what essentially evolutionary power has created in the diversity of life cycles, lifestyles, behavioral interactions, opportunities to fill the void that is created by different elements of ecological niche. So tremendously interesting. We are really quite close to our scheduled closing time. We can, I guess, pick up one or two questions, Matt, if there are any. Is Matt still with us?
Matt's gone.
Don't know where he is. Matt, you're back. Any questions come in? I've just suggested we've got quite we're pretty close to our closing time, but are there any questions that have come in for people following this tremendous talk on YouTube?
Yeah, we've got a couple. Someone's asking, can you see bee wolves in the UK?
Yeah, you can see bee wolves in the UK. So anywhere along the sort of south coast is good. Any sort of sandy habitats, any heaths or whatever. I found out a massive colony a couple of years back, actually quite near Sandy in Bedfordshire. There were probably getting on for maybe 1,000 females all stuck in their nest there. And to see all the interactions between all the female bee wolves, because there's often a lot of conflict between them. Yeah, just incredible. But yeah, anywhere on the south coast or any heaths, if you go at the right time, so maybe late June into August and even the start of September, you'll see the females doing some of the things that I said.
And is it true that dung beetles can navigate by the stars?
Yeah, so it was recently found out that I guess that all maybe actually, all dung beetles, especially the ones that are active at night time anyway, they use the orientation of the Milky Way to navigate to and from their burrows. When they're looking for dung and or if they're navigating to new bits of habitat. Yeah, and again, that was something that was only learned like fairly recently. So relating back to David's talk, and he was talking about light pollution and the inability to see the Milky Way is probably not just a bit of a thing for us. It probably also relates a lot to other animals too, if they use it to navigate.
Any others?
That's it.
Okay, so I am going to wind up the afternoon's proceedings. Ross, thank you again very much. And I thoroughly encourage everyone to look out for your book, How to Read an Insect. I can see from your Twitter feed that the cover is there, the details of the book are there. Go and learn about these wonderful things. Toxic farts and stealing tears. The bug world is amazing and entertaining, says Julie Smith in chat. I think the three presentations we've had this afternoon have been at the essence, at the core of what Buglife does. So on the one hand, we've learned about the intricacies of insects and invertebrates and their life cycles in their own right, but also their functional importance for other groups. We've learned about some of the pressures on invertebrates and insects, pollution, invasive non-native species, new contaminants such as microplastics. And we've learned about the kinds of things that Buglife officers are doing to address those problems while helping to conserve that tremendous diversity of life on Earth that is represented by the small things that run the planet. I would urge anyone who is looking in to look to ways to help invertebrates, but also, if I can appeal to you, if you are interested, please support Buglife, join us. There is an app you can download called Bugs Matter, which will help you to track the trajectory of invertebrate populations in the United Kingdom near to your patch. What I think I also realized listening to the presentations today is just what incredible power we have, not only among the staff of Buglife, but around the allies who help us to make the case for our work. So thank you to all the speakers who've presented to us this afternoon. Thank you to everyone who's joined us and listened in. And thank you to those of you who have asked questions. Do look out for Ross's work. Do look out for the work of Buglife, and please get involved in the mission. So thank you to everyone and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Many thanks, all. Many thanks, Steve.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Well done, everyone. Kept almost perfectly to time there. Every stage.
I think we're still broadcasting, are we?
No, I think we've stopped now, have we?